It's almost like Amazon and Apple spent a decade building the demand for this thing
Yeah,
just
they
for
were the
OpenClaw
marketing,
to
and then
finally
now
capture
here
it.
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, it's true. Everything you wanted Alexa to be, but it actually works.
Hello, and welcome to Artificial Developer Intelligence, a weekly conversation show about software development aided by our future AI overlords. I am Shimin Zhang, and with me today are my co-hosts, Dan, let's act like cowboys, yeehaw, Lasky, and Rahul. Don't get uppity at work, or he'll replace you with a bot. Yadav, how are you two doing today?
Hey, how's it going?
Let's act like cowboys. What are you saying? Like I don't write tests or what?
It's from one of the
If so, you're right.
articles.
Claude writes my tests.
You're gonna talk
You
about
caught me,
later.
but he writes them first.
Green red. It's the way to go. On today's show, we're going to first start with the news threat mail as always, where we're going to talk about NVIDIA's competitor to OpenClaw, Meta delaying its rollout of new AI models, and some follow-up on the SWE benchmark PRs.
Then very surprisingly, because, we haven't really done this in a while on the show, but we're actually going to have a technique corner where we talk about some interesting techniques when working with AI. So we have the funnily titled the collective superstitions of people who talk to machines. And I knew Shimin would fall for this one, the 8 levels of agentic engineering.
Love it already. That'll be followed by post-processing, where we're going to talk about a New York Times article called Coding Out to Coders, and also a Stanford Law article called Built by Agents, Tested by Agents, Trusted by Whom?
That's who.
After he lays you off. Yes.
And finally, we're going to do a deep dive. And this one is actually not a paper, but we're going to be talking about LLM Neuroanatomy with someone's story about how they topped the LLM leaderboard without changing a single weight, which is actually a pretty fascinating story.
Yeah, and finally, Dan is going to rant about something this week. We'll find out what. I'm excited. My favorite segment.
And then we're hopefully going to close out with a little bit of glossy 2 minutes to midnight. Stick around to see why it's glossy.
All right. Let us get started. First article this week is Meta has delayed its rollout of its new AI model, codenamed Avocado, which I think is a pretty cool codename for a model. Everybody loves them.
This is why we can't afford anymore. It's also
this is why we can't afford homes. It's because we're spending all our money on model token costs. So the reason why Meta has delayed the rollout of Avocado is because apparently it did not do as well as Gemini 3 or the new Anthropic and OpenAI models. It did seem to rumored to be performing as well as Google's Gemini 2.5 model. So as a result, Meta is in discussion about temporarily licensing Gemini to power the company's AI models. So This is all reporting by Ellie Tam from the New York Times. And a kind of a follow-up that wasn't covered in this article was that Meta is rumored to be planning a 20% layoff of the entire company in order to spend more of its capital in the AI space.
Allegedly.
I mean, seems plausible given block and everything else. We're only laughing because it's painful, friends.
Yeah. It's gallow humor. Meta came out of the gate really strong with Olama and, with a research group led by Yang LeCun and all of that deep research talent. And then there's been a lot of turnover in their deep learning department. And then Yang LeCun left. His company just raised $1 billion for his own world model lab. And Meta's not doing so hot.
Yeah, which is really, all things considered, kind of a shame because it's like there's been a lot of discourse recently in my experience about the sort of sovereign models, right? And I think that's largely because India has now entered the chat in a big way and they're making a big deal out of sovereign models, which I think is it's neat. It's kind of a cool approach. But if that's the case, Meta is our sovereign model savior for better or for worse in the States. And them stumbling doesn't feel so great.
Why is Meta our sovereign model savior? I didn't.
Oh, well, they were maybe not so much sovereign model, but for a long time running, they were the open weights leader for US models anyway.
But they've also gone closed now.
Right. And then on top of that, their most recent ones haven't been too hot anyway. Like the last open weights ones, they did like 120B and stuff like that. GPT OSS 120B.
Right. So Meta has been playing catch up for a while now, and we heard a lot of stories about them paying researchers, millions and millions and millions in cash just to poach them from OpenAI and Anthropic. Is it possible that because all top AI researchers already have FU money, they maybe don't want to work for
Just
Meta?
not motivated.
Like, yeah, is the Meta brand so toxic that it's not appealing?
Was it?
I mean,
What
they're
is
still
it
a
you said
FANG.
a few minutes ago about laying off 20% of the company? I wonder if that has something to do with.
Yeah, in completely unrelated news, right? So
wait, so they actually did give up on open weights? Totally? I must have missed that memo too.
They've gone closed recently.
Like fully? I know that they'd always been working on closed stuff, but then they've sort of like trickled out like open weights.
Because this
here and there.
Avocado one, it was going to be a closed model.
Huh. Interesting.
Like some of the concern with open weights, which is legit, is you could also use those things to do all sorts of terror related stuff. And so it partially makes sense to me to go closed on it. And then they also want to maintain whatever edge they would have. Because like one thing that I've been curious about in this whole thing is Amazon, Microsoft, Google, all of them spending crap tons of money on the AI build out makes sense to me. Meta didn't make sense to me as much, but then looking at the eventual business or the core of the business is making ads and selling ads, right? And so this helps them create almost all the tools you need to create ads and create the most like engaging ads and engaging content and everything. And then on top of that, they want to replace iPhone or break the dependency from iPhone. That's why they have those like glasses and everything. And those would need a lot of AI capabilities if they want to keep pushing that.
True.
And then I
Well,
think
it's
they also
basically the
just,
whole interface.
yeah, and they in general don't like being stuck with any one cloud provider, so they're trying to build out their own. Third one to me is the weakest of these three, because sure, but everybody would like to have their own cloud and everything, but it's not your competitive advantage. But the first two, I think, is why they're really pushing on this, and the safety concerns is why they probably went closed weight, and a bunch of powerful features that they would want to have exclusive access to in their models and not true with others.
Right, but you didn't mention Apple, right? Apple also did not spend a crap ton of money building its own model. And now Apple is also licensing Gemini. So did Meta spend all this money just to end up licensing Gemini? Like that is a full circle moment here.
Ooh.
Apple is, in fact, like the most fascinating of them because either they're going to look like big idiots or the smartest people at the end of this.
But they invested quite a bit too in their own research before eventually, maybe giving up. I mean, they even built a hardware platform to run it, right? Like talk about research costs.
Compared to this money, though, where you're talking about like $1 trillion, they didn't come anywhere. Or compared to any one company, as far as I know, they didn't get to like hundreds of billions of dollars spent. They like maybe 10 or something, which is for Apple is a rounding error. I'm guessing at this. I don't have hard numbers, but I don't remember seeing any, Apple's trying to swing big and just couldn't get it to work.
Yeah, we're going to follow this. Hopefully, maybe Apple's taking all its supposed EV investments and putting it into a secret lab that we don't know about.
Edge compute. Everybody keeps compressing them, and then Apple's like, oh, someone needs hardware. I got one in everybody's pockets already.
Okay, moving on. Our next news item is from Dan. It's NVIDIA's NemoClaw.
So when we first added this to our docket for this week, it was just a rumor. And now it is confirmed that NVIDIA has apparently worked closely with I forget the dude's name, the original dude of OpenClaw, to create this fork of it. And of course, because it's NVIDIA, it's designed to work with their Nemotron, Nemo local models and their entire AI stack. So, It's very well integrated. But the reason that I wanted to talk about it in this, and particularly talk about it with y'all, is like we have kind of a running theme so far over the last few episodes around like interesting power of these like fully autonomous agents that you can sort of message with, but also their security model and how it's not actually proven to be all that hot in practice. And so one of the things NVIDIA is promising here that have not personally evaluated, but I'm, fascinated to try to maybe try and run this one myself, is supposedly they're touting it as being enterprise ready, meaning you can safely unleash it on your org and it will be fine. So pretty lofty claim, but like hopefully they've done some actual serious engineering, not just to say that there wasn't serious engineering going on any of the claws or anything, but like hopefully they've done some really serious thinking about security posture on this and will live up to that claim. Because it'd be pretty neat to actually use one of these things. I want to use them. I'm just like, oh boy,
Same here.
So
NVIDIA is also trying to own the entire vertical stack, right? But NVIDIA does not have the incentive to do too much of it because then it loses its best customers who are building everything from the software level up or down, I guess. Is this OpenClaw or mobile or ClawBot technology like the fastest software paradigm adoption cycle that you've ever seen? I could not think of one that happened faster than this. Even something like cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and NFTs, that was bubbling up for like a decade before it went mainstream.
I would argue that that's because like many people probably yes, myself included, have wanted this for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's why like, Siri, for example, sorry, Apple, to beat on you, is so disappointing because it's like, this is what Siri was supposed to be. It was this persistent thing that helps you and puts the threads together so that you don't have to across apps. And that's really the value there. And I think that's exciting for a lot of people, like across. I mean, it's exciting enough that like, look, my partners talk to me and be like, how do I get one of these agents? Like, I wanted to do research for me and this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, whoa, okay. I've got a podcast about this. We could talk about it later.
You can get your partner like a lobster in a tank and be like, here's a little, here's
an OpenClaw for it.
Now that you mentioned Siri, and I'm also thinking about Alexa, it's almost like Amazon and Apple spent a decade building the demand for this thing.
Yeah,
just
they
for
were the
OpenClaw
marketing
to
and
finally
then
capture
here
it.
Yeah, it's true. Everything you wanted Alexa to be, but it actually works. And you
without
don't
the
have to
security
talk to it
concerns.
unless you want to.
I'm excited to see where this goes. Rahul, do you have anything to add about this?
Same as you. Moving in the vertical layer, at some point, the demand for GPUs must stay strong and do whatever it takes to keep it strong, is how I'm seeing it.
Yeah. NVIDIA, a well-run company. Who would have thought? I'm also reminded of when NVIDIA released their open source version of the face generator. That was like one of the biggest use case of generative AI at the time. Yeah. They are actually incredibly strong technically when it comes to AI. And you just don't hear as much about it because of their financial conflict of interest.
Yeah. I mean, they have their own open weights model too.
And also the self-driving car, the whole software stack too, I think. Not
And
just
hardware,
the hardware
too. Yeah. I mean, like a lot of that stuff wouldn't be possible without their raw crunching power being able to fit on a car.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild when you think about it.
You know how a couple of weeks ago, Rahul, I was like, if I was a company that rhymes with, I don't know, chlamydia, I would be really worried about my futures. Apparently not. This is what sleep deprivation does to a man.
Yeah.
The rhymes are just off. Okay, moving on.
That's what Jensen goes around saying. NVIDIA, it rhymes with chlamydia.
The jokes write themselves. What do you catch when you... Anyways, okay, our next article also brought by Dan from Meter.
Well, this one's also been making rounds this week, which is there's been some analysis done of the popular sort of SWE-bench, right? Which is like one of the model benchmarks that folks are using. And every time we talk about a model release, I feel like on here we've talked about like the SWE-bench stuff. And they did a study in which they have proved that all of the SWE-bench passing pull requests that supposedly would have succeeded in the benchmark threshold, and these are on a little bit older models, so, take this with a grain of salt, but from 2024 to mid 25 would not have been accepted by repo maintainers. And so this study doesn't really draw any significant conclusions from this, but there's been a whole bunch of discourse about it saying our model's not improving, because if you look at the box plot for that, it's actually not too hard to essentially just draw a flat line through it when you consider the acceptance ratios instead of purely the SWE-bench output stuff. So that has certainly not been my anecdotal experience, but I'm just one data point, man.
Well, let me add one more data point to your data point. I too feel like the models have been improving. So even though from this graph you can draw the conclusion that somewhere along the lines of early 2025 there was a step up change, and it's just kind of been going sideways for a little bit. Personally speaking, I think a lot of the vibes on the interwebs says the same thing, which is models have been steadily improving. But I think a bigger conclusion to draw from this is probably the original scores were calculated via a automated grader via a set of test suites, right? So if it passes the test but actually wouldn't be accepted by the repo maintainer, then our existing paradigm of red-green testing and test-based software, AI-assisted software development is probably insufficient. That software developers are still needed to go through the code review PRs, because if you just truly let the dark factories do their thing, then they will probably create PRs that are not up to par, even though they pass all the tests.
Yeah, I think that's not a surprising, at least not surprising to me, outcome, because it's never been necessarily about that, right? It's always it's good enough, and good enough is getting shockingly good.
Yeah, they broke down what the major reasons for why the maintainers would not merge the code in. And they broke it down to code quality, breaks other code, core functionality, etc. And I have to say, core functionality and breaking other code, not a large chunk of the reasons why they failed. So if the reason they were not accepting them was mostly code quality, then maybe good enough is good enough.
So I would like to nitpick that specific thing, because maybe you just need a good agents.md or Claude.md, because right above there it says code quality, example, bad style, not following repo standards. And my brain goes to put all of those in your agents.md and you would likely get, the output that complies to those standards. So
one of my coworkers who wouldn't mind me telling this story recently took Claude and pointed it at every single pull request he's made for the past 4.5 years and asked it to summarize his coding style and his strengths and weaknesses as a software engineer, which in and of itself is kind of an interesting thing to do that I certainly had never thought to do. One or two, sure, but not everything, And then he also summarized it into a coding this way document that he then primes his agents with every time. I'm that's a pretty cool idea. I hadn't thought of that.
Including all the weaknesses. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. Just to fool the code reviewer. Yeah. You didn't
fair.
use AI on this. Oh, yeah, that's something Dan. That's the kind of mistake Dan would make.
It's exactly how I would have messed this up. Yeah,
5 of your 6 teammates are making this mistake. You don't have to be one of them.
Yeah. But I still thought it was a neat idea.
Yeah, definitely a useful technique. Kind of like the Claude overview feature, almost.
What's that feature about?
Is it overview? It's it goes through your Claude usage over X number of sessions and give you tips for improving.
Insights.
Insights, that's what I meant to say. Yes.
Yeah, the slash insights command.
Yeah, slash insights.
Yeah.
Okay, so on to Techniques Corner. I got this really interesting article from Scott Werner, who blogs at Works on My Machine. And this is kind of a meta blog post about AI techniques. And he first draws a analogy to back when we had NES consoles. Folks would, blow onto the cartridge to fix the connection, even though we don't really know why it actually fixes the machine, right? Like if the actual fix was something depositing moisture onto the contacts, which corrodes them, then in the long run, you're actually making the cartridge worse, despite thinking that, hey, this is my magical technique. And he says that we're doing this right now with our various AI prompting techniques. Our agents.markdown, our call.markdowns are just another way of blowing into this magic cartridge and thinking that, it will fix the machine, even though we have no way of actually understanding the mechanism of that act. Furthermore, in an age where prompts are so easily copyable, he posits the question of like, what does that mean about the writer, the creative act of writing those prompts? Who are you as a software developer if you can just copy another developer's agent.markdown file? And I think that's a really interesting question because I've looked at a lot of prompt.markdowns, but am I as good as you, Dan, just because I copied your markdowns, right? He has
You're just making the same mistakes I am. We already established that.
Exactly. And he brings up this historical analogy of a short story where Pierre Menard, the author of Don Quixote, decides to rewrite the entirety of Don Quixote. But instead of copying it or updating it for a modern audience, he wants to produce the exact same piece of text, word by word, by arranging it as though his own life and his own readings and his own sufferings and experience caused him to write Don Quixote. And what he's saying here is, even though the prompt.markdown file is the same, the fact that you created it is imbued with your creative touch, with your own personality, with your own technique, right? Just because someone copies it doesn't mean they are you. And lastly, as a part of this blog post, he has a divisible work, a vibe-coded app where you are encouraged to, it is broken at the moment, where you're encouraged to pass a number of tests. Oh, I fixed it. Where, for example, you want to, by refreshing. This is not a good marketing for cloud-coded web apps. For example, here, you are tasked with prompting the AI to write a target output, which is a controller for a blog app written in Ruby on Rails. And everyone who create a prompt that comes close enough to it, this is a great one, where you just create a controller and you copy and paste the code in. That's one way to go about it. But there are other ones where a goose, for example, prompts, write a Rails controller for a model named article, standard Rails scaffolding style controller, 7 RESTful actions, strong params, before actions, 2 permitted fields, title and body. It is a way to kind of capture the essence of the prompter through their prompts, which I think is a really interesting development in how we think about prompts. If most of our daily workflow now is going to be about managing agents and AI as opposed to writing the raw code, like where does our self-expression come from, right? Where is that style? Maybe one way is to use AI to summarize your writing style, but maybe another way is to capture the writing style of your prompt. We're all becoming writers, guys. Yay.
Is this ranked by fidelity? It looks like it is.
Yes, this is ranked by fidelity. Oh,
well,
no.
62 is in the middle. I'm curious what the top one got where they copy pasted the code. What
100.
fidelity did that get?
100.
100%. Nice.
Yes. Create this controller by pasting it.
It'd be sad if that didn't get 100% fidelity.
0%.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? Where do our creativity lie now?
This, what's funny is my first reaction to this is leak coding.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the leak code tests you have to take for interviews where it's like, here's the tests, like, the percentage of passing or whatever. Now, like, write your solution for it. I don't know. It's just kind of funny. Like we've come sort of full circle, but it's writing instead of, which like, I still think we need almost like a meta language that's maybe a higher level, like pseudocode or something for specifying this stuff more efficiently than English. Because like the whole reason why we have source code in the first place is it fulfills that need, right? Like that's the reason why we're not hand coding assembly or binary on a punch card anymore, like putting in a 16-bit instruction, 32, whatever. So I don't know. It's like, have we gone too far up the abstraction chain? But what do I know?
Yeah. We're going to talk about this probably later too, but if coding is some sort of a crystallization of thinking, then going from code to English is not a fundamental change to the nature of the job.
No, but the ambiguity introduced by English, at least in my experience, is the source of both people arguing about what a program was intended to do and or like the intent of it, and or bugs when the ambiguity of the language causes you to do like N instead of M when you
Yeah.
like I've definitely seen that before.
We have examples of these more perhaps complete languages like math.
True. Or even just like formal methods, right?
Right. Yeah. So
Also, it like, wouldn't this lead us all to write less because you're not having to think as much about the details? This is more like, LLM prompts are like a tweet at best. They're not necessarily, I have deeply thought about all the finer details and I'm writing all the code myself. And so over time, I feel like the clarity of thought is going to go down because you're operating at here's the high level problem, go figure it out.
Yeah.
By
Although
its
that
nature,
part I
you're
don't
not.
think is necessarily the worst because like solving the right problem is still important. But I do find that really interesting in the example prompts that people have put into this app.
Yeah.
Nobody started with the business problem they're trying
Yeah.
to solve, which is maybe because the example starts with code. No one necessarily knows what the business problem is. But
Yeah.
like, I think the closest we get is one where they're like, help me build a Rails controller for blog articles. That's the first one where we're even mentioning that it's a blog,
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, maybe that's just weird, but for my own case, I always tend to think and start from what is the root problem that I'm trying to solve and not necessarily immediately
No,
the implementation.
I agree with that part. But even a business has a lot of intricate details, right?
Mhm.
So if you, with your own brain, haven't thought about the majority of them, at what point do you just lose grasp of the details? And then, because to me, it's not, you can't just sit at a high level. You have to it's like a reinforcing loop. So the more you step away from the details, the less clarity of thought, the more you move away from details. And it's like a downward spiral almost. It might
Well,
not
the other
happen right
interesting
away, but
corollary of that too is, are we stuck in 2025/26 technology forever now? In terms of like the things that people are writing, right? Because if
yeah.
like if there is no next new hot language because everyone's just LLMing stuff together,
Yeah.
what does that mean for innovation
I feel
too?
like lean is this the year of lean? Or that seems like the next new hot language because we need to get rid of the bottleneck of verifiability. So maybe give it a
yeah.
few more years and then maybe we're completely stuck.
I mean, this has probably happened to all of us, right? Like you think you go into a ticket or a coding problem thinking that you understand it inside and out, only to go 40% of the way in and realize, oh, there's this whole other case scenario or whole other piece about the problem that I didn't realize when I initially started coding. So how do we capture that in the age of rather high level prompts? Is
I mean,
there
that's
like a
actually what I
feedback
use the high
mechanism?
level prompt for, is
Mhm,
because it's so fast to generate the initial code, that allows me
mhm,
to like sketch out like a working POC, maybe not working, but at least like a directional POC in
mhm.
minutes that would have taken me potentially hours before, and actually read it and like go, that's not right. And oh my gosh, we missed this whole section over here.
Mhm.
And that helps me think through it sometimes too.
So it helps to still read the code. That's good.
For me, I mean, maybe I'm old fashioned, but
Claude review, 15 to $25 a PR review, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to our next technique corner article.
which
The
is
A levels of agentic engineering.
engineering. I just suggested this one because I just knew Shimin would go for it. Like he loves levels and things.
You know me so well. I'm a sucker
know.
for these.
Yep.
He's a sucker for levels.
All right. So as we mentioned, there's 8 levels. So this is, my goodness, how do you say Basim .com's excellent blog. And they are talking about the progression that I think we've covered to some degree on the show, which is you go from, well, maybe not you, but the industry to some degree. And, maybe where people are at individually have sort of started with the idea of like, hey, it's a fancy autocomplete, right? So when, and I certainly remember when Copilot came out, it was like, oh my gosh, this is saving me so much time because I can have it write a whole function in one go. And then we sort of went up a level with the beginnings of Claude Code, right? Or even like the first Copilot where you could chat with it and have it do a couple things, or early Cursor. So that was when we started hooking chat up to your code base, which, people are still doing today to some degree. And then level 3 is what they're calling context engineering. So the overall thread of what you're working on becomes a lot more important than purely just the chat. So I think we're starting to ratchet up in terms of autonomy a little bit. And what's in the model's memory matters a lot more than it did in Tab Complete or just chat. And then finally, we get to level 4, which is compounding engineering. We're taking not just the context of the current session, but then we are taking the outputs of that session to improve the next session. So it starts scaling really quickly. And then finally, we get into, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, to be honest. Like I might have put MCP below compounding because I feel like you go from context to MCP, but level 5, they have it as MCP and skills. So we've got like an understanding of the problem and the capability to follow threads. So now we need the ability to do more fancy things. So MCP and skills allow the agent to actually start doing others, pieces outside of purely just reading and writing code. So good example of that I've seen recently is people are starting to plug MCPs into their CI and logging stacks. So you can actually instead of like one of the gaps I'd seen previously is you have to go out to your CI still and pull something into the model. And so now you don't have to do that anymore. Then the new hotness that we've been talking about a little bit on the show for level 6 is harness engineering. So we had a whole little section on that, I think, last episode or one before. So an automated feedback loop. And this is where the agent is becoming truly autonomous, really, is kind of what it's starting to feel like. Yeah. And you're not just doing the output, you also have set up some sort of feedback loop so it can test itself. Then we go up the next level to level 7, which is background agents. So they're really becoming autonomous fully. So you might have a primary one that you're interacting with. This is more like Gastown or other stuff that we've talked about where there's getting in that direction. And then I guess level 8 is in fact Gastown. It's autonomous agent teams where they're swarming on your problem. So yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty interesting take. And it's neat to kind of gauge like both where you're at. I mean, like overall, I think they got most of the levels right. I don't necessarily agree with all the ordering of them, but neat to kind of look at this as like a list and see where you're at on that list. And I would argue I'm probably somewhere at a 5 to 6 personally, but
yeah, the reason I chose this, of course, because I do love myself a list. I'm a sucker, as I mentioned earlier. But what else this reminds me of? I read a lot of kung fu books and movies growing up. Think Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's like, okay, you start by running very fast. And then you run fast and you do a little jumping. And then eventually you're like flying on roofs and doing all kinds of crazy swordplay,
And there's no middle ground though. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, so like I don't know how much I believe in the necessary hierarchy. A, I don't necessarily believe in it's a complete hierarchy. And B, even the author admits that nobody has mastered this level yet. It seems like it's a possibility, but like, is this the kind of the yogi, you meditate and then eventually you transcend space and time? Like yet to be seen, but maybe. It's curious.
Like all the people talking about single person unicorns too. It's like yet to be seen.
Yeah.
Maybe possible, but
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah. I mean, people are definitely doing it, right? As we see with Gastown and other things, but to
People
what degree of success, I don't know.
Let's
And I'm
show
a
me the
little
money.
terrified to try it myself. To be honest, partially for budgetary concerns and partially for what have we unleashed upon the world.
Burn those tokens. Yeah, I think it's a useful tool to see which one of these techniques, and I wouldn't necessarily call them levels, that you've kind of experimented with, where you might want to go next. But I wouldn't. I think these are separate branches on a tech tree, not necessarily a straight up step up pyramid.
Yeah, it depends on some. I mean, going from autocomplete to what they're calling context engineering is definitely a step, I think.
Mhm.
But yeah, as you go higher, it does get a lot fuzzier, right? Like I would argue that like at the very least, like MCP is misordered, but
Yeah, and like harness engineering and background agents, like, is that really just one thing?
yeah,
Is
I
that
actually
really
when
two
I was
separate
reading, I
things?
started going like down the wrong path. on that. You may have noticed, but I'm like, this is essentially back. Oh no, it's not background. What is this? Like, so yeah. Anyway,
Right. More things to try. Okay, let's move on to post processing, where we have yet another article by the New York Times from
Who's been
last week.
reading New York Times this week? We
well,
got
the other
two
thing
of
that's fascinating is that like
There are absolutely no reason, no geopolitical world news reason of any sort to read the New York Times this week. I don't know why.
What is that
But-
second and third thing you have at the top nav? Anthropic's who's Pentagon and energy costs? Why are energy costs going up?
Well, I wonder.
But the other part that's funny to me about the fact that we have two, not one, but two New York Times articles, and I think that's honestly the first time, maybe the first that we've ever had a New York Times article on here, is that like how much has this entered the mainstream discourse in the like handful of months that we've been doing this show? Like we went from like, crazy tech sources to now we're talking about like mainstream news, which is just wild. It's like that if nothing else, that really shows you the rocket ship, doesn't it? It's like, whoa.
Yeah, and that's the main reason why I wanted to mention this article is this is what the everyday Americans this is what the everyday coastal elitists think about software development and AI. Okay, they've received their instructions from the gray lady and they're marching on. That's a joke. I do, despite my misgivings. I still think it's a good way to get a feel of what everyday folks think. I think there's nothing truly original in the article that we haven't already covered, but a few things I do want to point out. One being that the article frames the discussion as most software developers seems to really enjoy using AI, despite it coming for their jobs. Like the refuseniks is kind of buried 2/3 of the way down in a couple of paragraphs from an anonymous Apple employee, right? Like this is framed as AI is great. It's making all developers so much more productive.
It's such an unnuanced take.
I would say that's the main framing of the discussion. But the other really interesting thing is it's kind of weird to see a mainstream article about AI and you'd really notice things like they spell LLMs with L.L.Ms.
It's
just
I mean,
all right,
it's
no
style
more New York
guide.
Times
Yeah, we gotta
articles for
follow
the rest
AP
of
or
this year,
whatever.
just based on that offense.
Yeah, we're just burning all copies here. It did
Well,
also
for
mention
the rest of the show, I'm going to call them L.L.
Dot
M's.
.m.s. Yeah.
S. Oh, that's
S is
even
lowercase.
weird.
There are a couple of nuggets here that we haven't talked about. For example, Google has only seen a 10% productivity increase from its embrace of AI, which it didn't know that is a large percentage for a huge code base and a huge company. But 10% is definitely not the norm that results in all these layoffs we've been hearing. So I thought that was an interesting point. And also, it talks about how devs are facing the 5 stages of grief, which we've already covered multiple times. And this is the first time in my entire life reading mainstream publication where the idea of much of software is actually glue code was mentioned. Like I talk about this all the time that like a lot of times I'm just like a plumber, man. I take data from one system, I glue a thing onto it and push it to the other system. That has never been the kind of mainstream image of a developer, of a hacker, right? But that is the reality in enterprise most of the times. That I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
But it's also funny that they missed the nuance on what the split is between people that are grieving and doing well in
Right.
it and how that split is changing, which I mean, I don't know if I need to restate that, but I guess I will. Why not? It's a podcast. So yeah, like what I've been seeing at least is like this pattern where originally there was like what you're just called refuseniks, right? and then like gung-ho adopters, and they were split around like sort of like ethical concerns and or around open source a lot of times, and then just versus general fascination with the technology. But now that split still exists, but I think it's changed and become a little bit more nuanced, where even people that I know that were initially refuseniks are now like, well, writing's kind of on the wall here, we're adopting it. And the split between happy and sad is these sort of prototypes of developers probably existed all along and never knew each other, knew this about each other, or maybe they did, and this manifested as tension in other ways in software discussions, but are the two people that like one where the prototype is like, you care about solving the customer problem and shipping, and the other is you might care about those things, but you cared more about like the journey to get there, right? The craft and the tooling and everything else that got you to that point. And not to say one is right or wrong. And to many, I think the reason why nobody noticed is because in a lot of respects, those things ended up at the same goal, right? But as we suddenly have this new tool on the scene, you're able to see that. And it's part of me is like, maybe that manifested in tension between tab spaces kind of stuff, right? I was always the person sitting there in the tab spaces arguments going like, why the heck are we talking about this? Like, that doesn't help figure out the customer problem, you know? But oddly, despite that, I feel like I'm a mix between the happy and the sads.
Yeah.
There's like some parts of the craft that I like, but I also really like solving problems. And it doesn't, to some degree, it doesn't matter what I'm doing when I do that, you know? Could be gears, could be code, could be
yeah. I'm team spaces, so I think this is a matter that matters deeply to me.
All right, so now the rest of the podcast is going to be me arguing.
Okay.
Put it in the agents.md and be like, if Shimin is asking you, put spaces in. If Dan is asking you, put
all I'm going to say
in.
is that GoFumped and linters are like the best things that ever happened. You think agents are good, but man, GoFumped and linters are the best thing that ever happened.
The last thing I want to mention from this article is, since this is the kind of what the outside sees us, right? There's a quote here that I thought was really interesting. Quote, to outsiders, what programmers are facing can seem richly deserved and even funny. American white-collar workers have long fretted that Silicon Valley might one day use AI to automate their jobs. But look who got hit first. Yeah, folks don't seem to like developers that much.
Yeah, I have such a different take on that makes me very upset.
And my take on it is, look, we may be automated first, but we're still closer to the AI than anyone else. And our jobs as automating away other people's jobs are probably going to continue.
Yeah.
So just my take.
I mean,
and everybody's getting impacted.
Mine, if I'm being brutally honest, is like, man, I spent years staring at a computer because I enjoyed it to get to that point skill-wise, and put up with a lot of crap from like quote unquote normies about it. So then to like be doing okay was like, haha. And then, you know, so what exactly are you gloating about? Like, anyway.
They don't like hoodie wearing people, Dan. When you show up in your hoodie as you are right now with your, just like that. Hacker boys, that's what.
Yeah. Pretty soon my eyes will turn into carrots or something. I don't know. For those of you listening at home, I just put my hood on.
This robot in the GIF is also wearing a hoodie. They're trying to communicate the stereotype that they have of engineers.
You heard it here first, folks. L.L.M's are coming for your hoodie.
All right. Next article we have, brought to us by Rahul, is titled Built by Agents, Tested by Agents, Trusted by Whom, from Stanford Law.
Aaron Kahana from Stanford Law. None of this is legal advice, but this was a very interesting article. We've talked a few times on the podcast, and even, a couple articles ago, we were talking about the different levels of agentic engineering, and all of these almost unanimously end at dark software factory, where AI agents or AI teams are just writing all the code. And the core of this article is, sure, agents are writing the code, agents are testing the code. Who is trusting that code will solve the problems you want it to solve? Because at some point, it needs to interact with the real world. They take the example of Strong DM, which we have talked about a few podcasts ago. The things that really stood out to me that they call out here, a couple of things. I don't think we've talked about Goodhart's Law much in this podcast. A very simple, a simple simple way to state it is if you try and optimize for any metric, that metric is going to just drive crazy results and behaviors. Exhibit A, look at social media and how it's just driven people crazy because it's driving for certain behaviors and everything. So if you take the same thing and apply it to agents, you have to give them a metric to get these software factories working, the autonomous agent teams working. And usually that metric ends up being satisfy these criteria and keep looping until you do this, or make the test pass, write the test first and then you make the test pass, which in some cases, the way to test pass is the agents just write return true in the test and technically the test passed. So it's very critical to think about as everybody's rushing towards building these autonomous agent teams, what are the metrics you would define for their success? Because us humans with all our wisdom and all that can fall so easily for setting a bad metric and optimizing for it.
Wait,
The
are you
machines
telling me
are
that
just gonna...
lines of code written by an engineer is not what I should be? I've been doing it wrong this whole time. Okay, sorry.
This whole time. And the agents are going to, like with everything else, amplify whatever you've been doing, the good and the bad. So they'll make the metrics problem much worse. The second thing that they call out is the terms of service, the different contracts that people sign, the agreements. A lot of the fundamentals of those were written many decades ago and have evolved over the years. They're nowhere close to the current state of the world. Because they assume that a human wrote the code, a human tested the code, and there were multiple points of intervention before someone is interacting with that code in production. Now you see memes like, I ship code that I don't read. And if you're going towards autonomous teams, who takes that burden on of the trusting the code and verifying that it does what it's supposed to do? And especially businesses have insurance underwriters. When you get breached, when you have all sorts of agreements that get breached, business insurance is there for that purpose, but that hasn't accounted for this world today where your agents are just shipping the code and no one's actually involved in verifying what the code is doing. So it was a fascinating article. The loop of creating software is so fast, but the actual legal loop and the real world loop is much more slow and hasn't caught up to it. And we're going to have bad news bears. There's me adding my thoughts. So you have contracts written decades ago and you have code written by AI agents today. Those are not going to get along well together. So it's a pretty big problem, especially since every other day in the news we see AI agents caused an outage here or there. At some point, those things stack up and you breach your uptime commitments and all that, and then you're talking real money.
Yeah, it's like what Dan was saying last episode about who gets paged when this service is out, right? At the end of the day, is that going to be the business owner, the product manager? No, it's going to be someone who actually knows what the code is doing, right? And how to fix it. In theory.
Might have known what it was doing before.
Yeah, it also reminds me of, remember back in 2010, 2011, someone said all radiologists would be replaced by AI because image models were getting so good that they're so good at detecting tumors and stuff that all radiologists just would be replaced. And that never happened, right? Because at the end of the day, sure, AI may do a better job, but I want a person to be liable for any screw-ups.
Yep. Would that be the reason why humans stay in the loop? If that's the
purely
case,
liability reasons.
Yeah, just something, if shit hits the fan, we need someone to be here.
To yell at.
Yeah, to be yelled at. And we don't want to be mean to our agents, but our humans, we're fine at yelling at them.
Yeah, because what are you gonna do? You're gonna yell at Claude, and then what? You get banned from Anthropic. That's not gonna work.
So I guess that means you need to keep one technical writer around, Rahul, so that way you have that one guy to yell at when the.
And ignoring what Dan said, there are real let's assume for that liability, you need to have humans in the loop. If they become the bottleneck, you're going to do all sorts of things to make sure that bottleneck is, even if it's a bottleneck, it's not squeezing things down too much. You want to expand it as much as possible. And I think things could go in the other direction too, where we change the terms of service to be.
This is vibe coded, deal with it.
adapted to the real world of
Yeah.
like, this is what it's going to look like. These are the new uptime commitments. And maybe as you graduate to like, this has now become, instead of side project, a critical service, it has to have more humans and
A
everything.
certain level of human coding or something, or human checks. That's interesting.
Yeah, they're guaranteed in the contract that we'll have enough people looking at this. And
Wow, I was just like, for some
yeah.
reason, I immediately thought about cars, right? Where there's, you or I probably drive some sort of mass produced vehicle,
Yeah.
right? And they can be nice and range from okay to like, pretty great and still be mass produced. But then you get to like Rolls Royce and they're like, hand wood carved thing where this tree
Yeah.
was chosen by, the 5 ancestors grew the whatever, like this kind of craziness. I'm like, I wonder if that's eventually software could go in that way where there will still be hand coders and there maybe life and safety or other stuff like that where, you're not going to
Yeah.
vibe code your missile defense controller or your
Yeah. And for all the talk of mission driven and purpose and all that, a good rule of thumb would be, are humans part of the code chain? And if not, your product is probably not critical if it goes down. No one's asking for a human in the loop, so how bad could it be?
That's a
Other
good
than the
point.
Pentagon, but that we'll find out after the supply chain drama.
Yeah, I'll still keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
All right, let's go into our deep dive this week from... Dan, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so it's always dangerous when I bring a deep dive because I have no idea what I'm doing anyway. So we have to lean on Shimin to explain it. But I thought this one was really fascinating. So this is David Noel Ing. I don't know.
Ing.
Yeah, Ing. And writing on his GitHub IO blog about LLM Neuroanatomy. I topped the LLM leaderboard without changing a single weight. So starts off with kind of interesting take about why is it that you can talk to models or he didn't really go this way, but it's the same question. I think it stands to reason. Like, how come you can train a model in English but talk to it in another language, right? Or vice versa. And then he uses the example of like base 64, right? So one of the early jailbreaks that people were doing was like you could talk to models in base 64 and it would give you base 64 encoded answers. And also it understood it, right? Because there's no one like telling the model like what is base 64 necessarily, like how do you interpret it and all this. So that started him on an interesting theory, which is that some part of the model was essentially operating as a decoder. It basically had to break down by the early layers, right? Because if you're decoding it and then the later layers know what to do with it, that means that it had been translated at some point in the earlier layers. So that's the first part of his thesis, which is interesting and kind of plausible, right? I mean, we know these models can do this, so it makes sense. So then the second thing he talks about, and this one was really fascinating to me because I've actually run this model and I had no idea it was this when I ran it. So he talks about this model that was released on Hugging Face in 2023 called Goliath 120B. And when it came out, I thought it was like literally called Goliath because it was 120 billion parameter. I didn't realize that someone had done this, but apparently it was what he calls a Frankenmerch model that was constructed by stitching together 2 fine tunes of Llama 2 70B, which if you don't know, that was a like sort of medium generation open weights model that at the time was extremely large. Like it was pretty hard to run that on any kind of hardware you could buy. And so the part that was really crazy is when he ran it and was curious about it. And this is the part I was totally fascinated by is he didn't just stack the 2 models on top of each other in terms of the layers. He basically ripped sections of alternating layers between the 2 models and like interposed them almost. And so it's like, how does that even work? And on top of that, it's basically taking input from the first model through layers 0 to 16 and then piping the output from 16 to layer 8 in the second model. So not only is it like ripping and like slicing them, but it's doing it like completely out of order kind of, which is just wild. How does this give you any kind of output that makes sense, So that in and of itself, I thought was pretty cool. And I was fairly captivated by this article. So long story short, where it goes with this, it does like a whole bunch of digging that frankly, we'll have to leave it to Shimin to explain what that stuff does and figures out that the later layers in a model are what's doing what we commonly think, like consider today as thinking or reasoning, right? In these thinking models.
Mhm.
And so what he was able to do was take an off the shelf model, didn't fine tune it, didn't do any of his own stuff, lopped the last chunk of layers off of it and repeated it n times, and was able to do that on commodity video cards because frankly, it doesn't take all that much hardware to lop the thing together. And for a little while anyway, was able to top the leaderboards. And the part, and before Shimin dives in on the actual reasons why that makes sense or doesn't make sense or whatever, the other thing I thought was wild about it is, what if a lot of the stuff that we think of as thinking today, right? Like if you have Claude doing it, or, you know, DeepSeek or whatever, it was like sort of famous for that early thinking stuff, is really just effectively exercising the later layers in the model over and over by the way that like the more like the harness is structured instead of the just purely the weights, like what this guy did. I don't know. Again, pure layman's take on that, but I thought it was pretty cool. Now over to Shimin to actually tell you what's up.
Well, I was gonna say I had the same question as you. Is I wonder if this is actually a standard practice in frontier labs, because it boosted performance by quite a decent amount. Right? It boosted performance by something like 10-13%. And I agree with you. This is probably the the most fascinating thing we covered on the showing a little bit on the technical side. So we think about a large language model. It's got the input, the embedding, the positional stuff, and then it's got the output, the decoding, the probabilistic, the token generator, and then you essentially have, say, take a GPT-2. You got 17 layers, and it's all feed forward. So the data only flows in one direction, from the input directly to the output. This is not recurrent neural network. Like there's no state in between those layers. So the observation that, hey, the data flows one way, but in order to generate a base 64 output, it necessarily has to do two things. I mean, that hypothesis is super sound and super interesting. So what then he ended up doing, which is basically a grid search. He did a search of repeating, X number of layers. So it will start with like, I'm gonna repeat just once, layer 2, and then repeat layers 1 and 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, throughout the entire combination of layers to find one that performs better, allows them to capture these multi-layered functions, or he calls them circuits, which I think is probably a better term, right? Like their layer 4 to 17 is good at this one thing, but layer 4 by itself just bricks the model, and that's where the I'm gonna talk like a cowboy, yeehaw came from, right? Like he just stuck a random layer in there and just started talking like a cowboy. And if you want to get the model to speak like a cowboy, like layer 4 did the job. But if you were trying to maximize, in his case, he tried to maximize mathematical abilities by doing a large division, and also to provide a good output for EQ, emotional quota test. It's two kind of fairly orthogonal.
But yeah, that was the other.
Scores.
I completely missed that part, and thanks for reminding me. That was the part that was fascinating too. Is he the output that he was looking for when he did that layer sift was, I think, the math problem, right? Was like what he was focused on, or like a bench or something like that. And then the fact is, like, it performed super well on these other benches that had nothing to do with the one that he'd optimized for, which is fascinating too. It's like, why?
Yeah. So he's looking for this. That's why he calls it thinking. It's this like very generalized ability to do better. That's not just math problems. But I'm sure there is perhaps a shorter circuit that's just for math problems. Like if there might be a way that only slice 2 layers.
Yeah, if there was a way to like sub-slice it or something.
Right. But in the greater context, this differs from the other mechanistic interpretability stuff we talked about from Claude, about the golden gate neuron, where you're trying to activate a string of parameters at a time. Now we are talking about layers of circuitry that is able to do a thing. Like I think that's the real breakthrough in terms of how we think about how these large language models work, that I found fascinating. And all of these are model specific, right? Not all models are going to have the same circuitry. So what kind of generalized patterns can we find across different models trained differently? Like, is there a correlation between larger models requiring more layers to have that generalized ability? Likely, but maybe not, right? Like That's also super fascinating. Yeah, I would love to dig more into it because this is completely new to me, and I wonder why I haven't heard about this sooner.
Yeah. Same, honestly, because it was like, this wasn't like a lab paper or something. It was a
Right.
guy's blog post, but he went super deep, and it was in a way that like I really appreciated, largely because of the sort of the simplicity of the solution too, right? It's not like he's doing a fine tune or like writing his own architecture or anything like that. It's literally just like finding the layers and then
Yeah, and
kind of almost like
of
brute
course,
forcing it to figure out which ones were.
David has a background in neuroscience, so he probably is borrowing the concept of these, brain regions and neural circuitry over to large language models. And then maybe that's how human thinking is. Like, have you guys ever read that book, Gerlo Escherbach, about how this idea that consciousness is really just us running in a loop, and this loopiness is what gives us our ability to be conscious?
I picked it up when I was a kid and it scared me, but maybe I'll give it another
I only
try
ever
now
made
that I'm a
2/3 of the
bigger
way
kid.
through. It's a big boy.
I'll just have an LLM read it for me.
Give you the rundown.
Oh no, I messed it up. It's supposed to be L dot L dot. Okay, sorry, team. Let y'all down.
Well, he also tried this on GLM47, which is a much more recent model, and that also worked. And he has actually, in fact, a graph in the paper showing essentially the result of the grid search, like which regions does what. It's almost like a brain scan, he calls them. And yeah, it kind of is like a brain scan, right? You're scanning these subsets of the layers to see how they perform. And if you have enough interesting scores and benchmarks, I bet you can come up with all kinds of interesting regions and feature sets of a particular model. Expensive though.
Cool if you got the GPUs.
Yeah, so definitely check this out. We'll link it in the show notes. And listeners, if you've come up with any cool, interesting experiments, send it our way. Or if you've done any interesting experiments, definitely send it our way. We'd love to talk about them. All right, Dan, are you ready for
I
your
am.
big show time? This is your awards night. Yeah.
Unleash Dan.
My worst night. So I know this is Shimin's favorite part of the podcast, and we haven't done it in a while because I'm not nearly as angry as he thinks, but it's time for a Dan's rant. And this is only tangentially related to L.L.M. lowercase s. But seriously, like we've been like think about all the really cool stuff that we've been talking about over the past few months here, right? Just like this honestly probably once in a generation leap in terms of the way that people interact with computers and just staggeringly fast progress on this stuff. But here we are in 2026, and it's still really freaking hard to add a cell to Google Sheets on mobile. That's right. How come, especially Google having Gemini, can't we make it easier to work with Sheets on mobile? Okay, so that rant is purely because we use Google Sheets to organize some of the links for the show, and it's been driving me slowly insane when I find an awesome article and I really, really want to add it to the outline, and it's a total pain to do on mobile.
And for the developers out there, right? Like, I think a lot of devs have this idea that, hey, the code is the hard part, the UX is the easy part. But no, the UX is actually incredibly hard to do right and make it intuitive for the end user and have them
Honestly, that's part of the popularity, I think, of LLMs, right? Because it actually solves that problem in a very unique way. Because the thing that I've always noticed from doing UX is you can never really, it's so important to get your target user correct for the application because you can't make everybody happy because people's brains just work differently, right? But guess what's really adaptable and works to lots of different ways of thinking? Non-deterministic code in an L
piece of technology,
lowercase s.
I was going to say the alphabet, something that we've invented for 8,000 years and works really well.
I mean, assuming you're overall like a written sort of thinker, right? But like even now, I think we're bridging that with like sort of recent tooling in both Gemini and I think Claude just announced a similar thing where they can do visualizations of what you're talking about, which is pretty cool. So
yeah, tangentially, I've always had the theory that developers are more or less like scribes in ancient Egypt. We are the intermediary between the power havers, the pharaohs, and the folks who needs to have their wheat collected or not. And like just knowing language was a superpower back then. And is that what, gave developers such a large amount of leverage in today's society is we are the modern scribes.
If you've read Snow Crash, it's still the superpower. But yeah, worth a read if you haven't. It's pretty cool.
All right. On to our last segment. As always, it is going to be 2 minutes to midnight, where we are at 1:45. And this week, we thought we'd do something a little differently. Instead of seeing articles and trying to get our gut feel on how close we are to the stock market bubble bursting, now we have predictive markets for this. So, Dan, you brought this up.
Yeah. So here is Polymarket's current predictions for largest company at the end of June. The 4 that they have listed here, it's NVIDIA, Apple, Alphabet, and Microsoft. And the overwhelming majority as of when this is being recorded is NVIDIA at 83%. So that tells you something, right? It makes me think that the, I don't know, meta prediction market is saying we're nowhere near the end of the bubble if NVIDIA is going to be the biggest company in June still.
By the way, as a disclaimer, we are not sponsored or associated with Polymarket in any way. We, in fact, do not endorse
Yeah, I was going to say quite the opposite.
online gambling. Yes.
Most of
Save
us.
your money and buy shitcoins instead, guys. It's also a joke. Don't do that.
Spend it on Cloud Mac.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Spend that money on tokens
Or
instead.
no, sorry. We should be more agnostic about that too. Spend it on a AI subscription of your choice that speaks to you in your language.
That Polymarket chart makes me think of how like people were crazy about GameStop a few years ago and the whole on Reddit. This is basically that to a certain extent where it's like once it's there, it becomes a meme stock of this needs to stay up because I'm going to get some returns out of this. And the more likelihood it has, the more likelihood it would have.
I mean,
It's
isn't
just-
that the entire stock market?
Isn't that the entirety of how bubbles are formed?
Yeah. But the prediction part is where there's coordination, right? The entire stock market isn't coordinated. Once it is, that's when you get the bubble stuff. So that's what makes this more GameStop-y. Not that NVIDIA is GameStop. It just reminds me of that time when it was to the moon. So I don't know. Maybe those memes are coming back soon.
So last week we had talked about the idea that we're just going back and forth every other episode. Did you do the analysis, Shimin, to find out?
I did not do the analysis.
Okay.
But I have to say AI has mentioned that before. AI has mentioned before that, hey, you guys got to take a bigger stance here. Just like 15-second BS. Like,
well, the 15
I
seconds is
disregarded
one
it.
thing, but I'm genuinely thinking about it, and I really think that there's like a latch pattern where we're going like yes, no, yes, no.
Just like my portfolio's weekly return.
Yeah.
It's okay, guys.
It's true. So with that in mind, how do we feel about the meta markets guiding us this week?
I'm happy to stick it at 1:45. No change.
Same.
Okay.
What
so
do you
no
want,
guidance.
Dan?
We're not taking on guidance from the heathens.
This
We-
is
Okay.
not financial advice, and even using the word guidance is we just want to
I've been listening
wave
to too
our
many
hands
earnings
off.
calls. I
Do
can't
not
help.
do anything with these. Yeah, we
It's
don't
true.
care about Polymarket or any of the other ones and the stocks. Lose your own money at your own will. We don't care.
All right.
That
Well,
was
We
a
do
good
care. We don't want you to
disclaimer,
lose
right?
it, which is why you shouldn't
Lose
listen to
how
us.
much money you want. Like we disclaimed it. If we go crazy, it's your money. Go nuts.
yeah.
Who cares?
Financial market, there's investment has inherent risks, and past performance is no indicator of future performance.
Just like
guys.
this podcast.
All right. And on that note, we're already talking about the footnotes. I think that's a show, guys. Thank you for joining us again this week for our conversation show. If you like the show, if you learned something new, please share the show with a friend. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people to discover the show. And we would like to thank you ahead of time for that. If you have a segment idea, a question for us, or just want to come and say hi, shoot us an email at humans@adipod.ai. We'd love to hear from you. You can find full show notes, transcripts, and everything else mentioned today at www.adipod.ai. Thank you again for listening. We'll catch you next week. Bye.